Min Vilotimma ljuder en gång, den sista gång, och mig i jorden bjuder en bädd så kall och trång, och den mig ej förskräcker, så satt jag sover där tills Herrens röst mig väcker, då ingen natt mer är.
The song you just heard is Min Vilotimma after Katarina Utas from Gammalsvenskby, the Old Swedish Village in Ukraine. Yes, there is a Swedish village in Ukraine, and here comes a little summary of its story. From the 1500s to the 1700s, the Kingdom of Sweden owned lands a bit everywhere in the Baltic Sea area, including in nowadays Estonia. The island of Hiiumaa was home to quite an important Swedish-speaking population with its own dialects and culture. In 1721, though, Sweden lost a big war to Russia. Amongst the territories that were passed from one power to the other was Estonia and the island of Hiiumaa. The Swedish-speaking population of the island was not really well treated by the aristocracy nor by the power in charge at the time, and the conditions for them really went difficult in the decades after that. This is probably why in 1762, when Catherine the Great, Emperor of Russia, was looking for new settlers in newly conquered territories over the Ottoman Empire in southern Ukraine, many Estonian Swedes decided to take their chance and move. It is not exactly certain whether they were moved by force or if they actually took that decision on their own. All we know is that most of the Swedish-speaking population of Hiiumaa left for Ukraine. 400 people remained on the island, while 1,200 decided to take the long journey to the Dnieper. And that journey was really perilous. 1/4 of those who moved died on the road. And for those who survived, the conditions upon arrival were far from ideal. There were no traces of houses nor other facilities that had been hoped for. Despite this very rough start, the Swedish settlers became farmers and fishermen along the Dnieper River. Their village was called a few decades later by the arriving German settlers Old Swedish Village, which translated to Gammalsvenskby. Let's note that at the time the Ukrainian-speaking population in the region was really low. That's actually why other people were invited to settle there. The inhabitants of Gammalsvenskby maintained their dialect of Estonian Swedish and an older form of Swedish church liturgy. Their church seems to have been especially important for this displaced population, probably as a way to keep traditions and a sense of community. The Russian Civil War and the Soviet regime were very hard on Gammalsvenskby and the older region there. So much so that in the 1920s, some people of Gammalsvenskby petitioned the Soviet government for the right to move back to Sweden. Their request was granted in 1929, and 885 people took the long journey by boat and train back to Sweden, where they were greeted by monarchy and officials. Among them was Katarina Utas, a singer who transmitted to Olof Andersson, a known collector of folk music, many songs, mostly religious psalms. Katarina ended up moving further to Canada with her family, yet the songs that she had transmitted are still a part of the Swedish folk repertoire nowadays. For the people who remained in Gammalsvenskby, life was not easy under the Soviet regime. Their church was closed in 1929, and in 1955 a dam was built on the Dnieper, flooding parts of the village. Yet Gammalsvenskby still stands today, and together with the neighboring German settlements is now composing the municipality of Zmijevka. It is estimated that around 100 people are still of Swedish heritage, although only a few people still speak the Old Swedish dialect, despite it being taught in school. The singing at the beginning of this video should be clear enough for you to pick up the melody, but let's talk a little bit about the text. It was written by Frans Franzen, a 1700s Finland-Swedish poet and clergyman. The text in Swedish is down in the description, and a translation would give something along these lines. My resting time is sounding. One more time. The last time. And in the earth, a very cold and narrow bed calls to me. Yet it does not frighten me, as I sleep so soundly there, until the Lord's voice wakes me up, and night is no more. So it is a song about death and the hope of rebirth in the light of the Christian God. I usually don't share any religious songs as I find them harder to relate to for everyone, but I believe here it is quite appropriate, seeing the importance that the church had for the people of Gammalsvenskby. Also, I find both the melody and the text very sad and beautiful. Swedish-speaking people from Estonia who moved to Ukraine and lived there for centuries before, for some of them, moving back to Sweden and even sometimes to Canada. This, I think, is a very good lesson about how boundaries and cultures and history are much more varied and complex than we tend to make them. I know next to nothing about Ukraine, but I know that little bit of history and culture happening in Ukraine, but tying to my usual topics of Scandinavian folk music and culture. I hope this contributes a tiny bit to awareness about Ukraine in this terrible time that it's facing at the moment. My thoughts are with the innocent people who are suffering from this conflict. Thank you very much for listening.